Hello there, Lunar Squadron, welcome back to the channel, and welcome to another Star Wars Jedi Survivor video. We are going to be moving along in our early access coverage of this game. Today, we're going to be talking all about the skill trees of Star Wars Jedi Survivor. As you all know, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order had about 33 different skills among its one skill tree in the game. This time around, we've got 9 different skill trees and about 75 different skills, so we've got a lot to get into today. But first, Nick and I have a very exciting announcement. Many of you have been asking Nick and I for merchandise, and we are very proud to announce that we have finally compiled our Lunar Squadron collection. That's right, guys, we've compiled a collection of t-shirts, hoodies, and other merchandise that we're very excited to share with you all. Just go to lunarsquadron.com. Now, before we get into this video, a few brief messages from Nick.
Yes, once again, we would just like to thank EA, Star Wars, and Respawn for bringing us out to their Jedi Survivor event and allowing us to get hands-on and play the game, and for providing us this early access footage so that we could unveil the brand new skill tree for Jedi Survivor to the world and break it all down and talk through it with you all, because this is the first time we have seen the Jedi Survivor skill tree, and this is very exciting. I know this is one thing that a lot of people have been wanting to see, so we're going to go ahead and break it all down right now.
Now, before we get into the specifics of all of the different skills that we have in this game, Nick and I first wanted to talk about just some general points about the skill tree. First of all, Nick, you had something that you wanted to share about being able to preview abilities, right?
Yeah, that was one thing that the team at Respawn was kind of keying us in on during the preview event, is that you will be able to preview what each ability does prior to spending a skill point on that ability. So you'll be able to see and just a sort of description of what's going to happen when you use that ability, just so you know one way or another if that's an ability that you are going to want to unlock. It will look pretty similar to this, where you'll get a brief video just showcasing what that ability can do for you in the game, just so you don't have to just rely on just the name of the ability and the brief description of the ability. You'll now know and see exactly what that ability will do for you. Additionally, I would just like to point out, we now have confirmation that there are 9 total skill trees in Jedi Survivor. There are 5 for the 5 various lightsaber combat stances. That one's pretty self-explanatory. There is 1 survival skill tree that dealt with resilience. So that dealt with the overall health of Cal Kestis, his base health, and the stim, upgrading the stim, how many stims you could hold, stuff like that. It was all having to do with the health abilities of Cal in this game. And then there are also 3 additional force abilities. One of them dealing with, the more base overall force abilities, telekinesis-like stuff, pull, push, that lift, slam, all of that kind of stuff. 1 skill tree dealing with the confusion, the new mind trick ability in the game, upgrading that. And 1 additional skill tree dealing with the concentration, which was the increase in maximum force and force stamina for Cal in Jedi Survivor. So that is the layout of the 9 skill ability trees in Jedi Survivor. We don't get a look at the skill trees for either the blaster or the crossguard saber in this B-roll footage. We're only going to be able to go through the single, double-bladed, and dual wield, but we just kind of wanted to let you guys in on what we saw during our hands-on preview, because we were able to see all of the skill trees except for the crossguard and blaster stance, because we did not have those stances unlocked yet. So those trees were just not available for us to look at, which you can kind of see here off to the right, but we kind of wanted to go over this basic information. And Andreas, there was one other thing that they keyed us in on during this preview that you wanted to go over.
Yes, there is. So when I started off playing the game, the first thing that I did was I went over to the survival skill tree and I started loading up on different survival abilities. I increased my maximum overall health and I increased the efficacy of my stim ability because I was accidentally on the Grandmaster difficulty and I was dying far too easily. But later on in the game, when I realized I was on Grandmaster, I turned down the difficulty to Jedi Knight like a normal, sane person at the event. And I also was tipped off by a dev who informed me that I would be able to reallocate my skill points, which is really awesome. And the way that this works is you get one refund for free. So what that means is all of the skill points that you've spent on different skills, you are allowed to reset all of your skills once for free by pressing the Y button. And what this will do is it will refund all of your skill points, and then you can reallocate all of your skill points as you want. So if you have any buyer's remorse, or if you're not liking some of the skills that you've used, you can actually reset all of your skill points for free and try some new things, which actually came in handy for me. And later on, once you have already used that free reset, you can reset again for the cost of one skill point. So you can do that in an unlimited amount of times. You can always reallocate your skill points by just paying one skill point, which is awesome, because I know with Jedi Fallen Order, I was kind of always wondering, what do I want to do with my skill points? Do I want to set it in stone and buy an ability? Now you don't really have that buyer's remorse. You don't really have that that feeling like, should I have bought that other thing? Because if you do have that feeling, you can just reallocate your skill points, and it's easy peasy from there. So with all of that, guys, I think we have the general framework and ground rules for the different skill trees in this game. I think now we can go through the skill trees one by one, and I kind of want to start off with the different abilities that we are seeing described and shown throughout the B-roll footage, beginning with the first ability for the double-bladed stance, that being Gathering Tempest. So what we've learned from Gathering Tempest is for the price of one skill point, which is pretty sure that's a common theme throughout all of the basic skills on these different skill trees, is that they're all going to start off cheaper, and then towards the top of the tree they're going to get more and more expensive. However, for the price of one skill point, you can unlock the Gathering Tempest ability, which allows you to deal fast strikes towards a single enemy with the double-bladed stance. Pretty cool, right?
Yeah, it is very cool. And one thing I want to just focus in on that you mentioned is the price of these skill abilities. All of the baseline skills in this game will cost one skill point. As you move up towards the more mid-level skills, you'll be talking about 2 skill points or so. And then as you move to the upper echelon of the skills, you're talking at about 3 skill points that will be the cost. So about 1 to 3 skill points will be the total cost for each of these abilities. At least that's what we experienced in our preview. Now, as we continue on past Gathering Tempest, we actually get to see one of the dual wield abilities. This is called Focused Parry. Now, he hasn't yet unlocked this ability, so it will give you the name of the ability, but it won't tell you what it does until you unlock the necessary skill. So if Andreas, if you want to keep on going, we now have to unlock Backstep Slash. This costs 1 skill point. It allows you, when you're holding LB and then you press X, you can attack and leap backwards, which will allow you to create distance from the target. It's a very nice early basic skill to learn for the dual wield stance. And as we continue, as we see him unlock this ability, as he pays the 1 skill ability, it will bring up this screen, which will give you a video preview of what that ability is going to do. Again, you can preview what these abilities do before you purchase them, but it will also give you a video preview once you purchase it, again telling you what it does. And as you continue, you will see that this now unlocks the next level of skill abilities, and now we see Split Reflection. And if you notice, this one costs 2 skill points, and this one allows you to hold the left bumper right before a blaster bolt hits to split the incoming bolt and reflect it at an additional target. So instead of just reflecting it back towards 1 stormtrooper or 1 scout trooper, you will be able to reflect it towards 2 if you're able to time that left bumper press. And you will notice here, now that we've unlocked the skill below it, we now get a description of what the next level of skill abilities does.
And if we go along to the next ability, we'll see this one is Uncoiled Strikes, just like Nick said. Because we have the skill below it unlocked, we're able to see what the next step in the tree is. With that description, you can see that this is a delay X input to perform a flurry of quick targeted swings. And what you're seeing here is that the dual wield stance is a great stance to get in, make some strikes, and then get out very quickly. This is a high output damage stance, but it leaves you exposed, so you're going to want to get in, do your damage, and then get out of there. So this will help you with a quick flurry of targeted strikes, and then you can use that first ability, which is to dash back quickly to get away from your target. Now here's another thing. Once you unlock that, you do see a quick little video, and like Nick said, you can preview this before you end up spending your skill points, so you can see what the uncoiled strike looks like before you even spend any points.
There is one thing I would like to say before we move on beyond dual wield. If you keep moving, I believe this video footage cuts back to the focused parry skill tree. Yes, I want to focus on these two abilities. So this one is called focused parry, and you'll see that it allows you with one skill point to perform a spinning strike upon releasing Y. And then above it, I remember this one being called precision release. And the reason I want to focus in on these two is because these two skill abilities during our preview were really helpful to us with the dual wield stance. Honestly, these abilities were the reason we were able to take down the Rancor successfully. We really needed these skills. It was two skills that the team over at Respawn were really excited to show off to us and really wanted us to focus in on to help us defeat the Rancor. They were really excited about the two abilities on the left. So I just want to kind of shout out those abilities because we found them incredibly helpful for us in our preview when using the dual wield stance.
And another thing that I do want to emphasize for this particular ability is if you look underneath the skill point cost for this ability, you can see that it will tell you that it uses force. And we noticed that was very much the case, that when we were using the focus parry, it drained our force ability very fast. And one thing that you want to do is if you're loading up on lightsaber skills that are using the force, you are going to want to upgrade your force ability so that you do have more overall force, or that your force drains at a lower rate, which I'm sure that you can upgrade your overall maximum force. I think I recall seeing something like that. I focused all of my abilities on survival and on the lightsaber stances, so I'm not sure if I ended up spending anything on force, but I think in the future I would really want to do that.
There's one thing I do want to mention before we move on, just to provide some additional context over some of the stuff that we've said based off of how we experienced the game. When you mentioned earlier about the ability to reset all skills, that was incredibly helpful for us because Andreas and I decided to pass the controller back and forth when we were battling the Rancor. We decided to do it on one build, and Andreas had a lot of his skills set into the double-bladed stance. And I wanted to use the dual wield stance to take on the Rancor because I wanted to try a new strategy taking him on because the double bladed was just not very successful for us. And the ability to reset all those skills and then change it and reallocate them mainly into the dual wield stance and upgrading our health completely changed the name of the game, completely changed the way our game was going, and finally allowed us to defeat that Rancor. So that reset all skills thing, which was not featured in Fallen Order, once you paid for that skill ability, you were locked into it. Incredibly helpful for you to try new strategies and come up with new ways to take on the enemies in front of you. Very helpful. Love that. Since we're just focused on, what helped us with the Rancor, I just wanted to shout that out once again and provide some additional context from our preview with Jedi Survivor.
Now let's go ahead and move on along now that we've given some very helpful tips that I think will help some of you out. I hope you guys learn from some of our mistakes. We're going to go ahead and go through each skill tree one by one, starting off with the single-bladed stance here. I want to start from the bottom and work our way to the top. Nick, do you want to kick us off with the first ability here, and then maybe we can move up to the second step and then up to the third step of abilities?
Yeah, so we don't have a description of all of these abilities. We are just going to basically describe what we believe each of these abilities are going to do, or what we remember from our playthrough using these various stances and what we think they're going to do. This is going to be pure speculation, just because we don't want to unveil too much and spoil too much for you guys, and we just want to be respectful to the dev team over at Respawn ahead of launch. So the first one down at the bottom, I do remember being called Lunging Strike, and this one kind of speaks for itself. It just allows you to lunge at your opponent and take a bigger strike at them, a more distant strike from them, allow you to cover more ground with Cal, which was incredibly helpful with the single blade.
And if you look at the next ability, I believe, just based on looking at the icons here, that this one is very similar to the initial lunging strike. You can see it's a very similar icon. However, this one does have a few horizontal lines behind the symbol of the Jedi doing the lunging strike. And so what I believe this one is somewhat of an improved lunging strike, and it'll allow you to increase your range when you're using that lunging strike so that you can hit enemies that are further away.
And then the one right above the lunging strike, that one is pretty straightforward from the icon. This looks like some sort of aerial strike, downward strike, where you will be able to strike with Cal with a single blade from the air. It kind of speaks for itself from its emblem.
Now, looking over to the icon all the way on the left, this one looks like it might be very similar to the split reflection ability, insofar as you might be able to deflect blaster fire at 2 enemies. Again, we're not entirely sure, but this is just based on looking at the icon here.
And then if you look at the base one all the way to the right, it looks like a downward strike. This one, again, looks pretty straightforward to the aerial strike. It looks like you will be able to do a downward stabbing strike from the air with Cal. You can see the speed lines behind Cal. To me, it's clear he's in the air here and he's doing a downward strike. So just more strike capabilities for Cal with the single-bladed saber here.
So to talk about the one above that that icon that you were just mentioning, Nick, the one that looks kind of like that overhead attack there. This one reminds me a lot of the ability that we saw with the crossguard saber, where Cal was able to hold down the lightsaber throw, charge it up, and then throw it at enemies to deal more damage. I'm wondering if this is going to be the same ability, but for the single-bladed lightsaber. So I'm just going to go ahead and make an educated guess that that's what this ability is here, either that or maybe extended range or something like that.
And then the one right above it, again, I think it kind of speaks for itself. It branches off from that aerial strike that we mentioned that's right there in the middle. It just looks like now Cal is more pulled back. So if I had to guess, it's some sort of upgrade to that aerial strike that we see right there in the middle.
And then looking at the 2 icons on the top left-hand side of the skill tree, these ones look very similar to one another, right? Like they look almost identical. I'm going to guess that this is kind of like a lunging strike, maybe more of a jump involved. It looks like he's almost like lunging forward, but the other one's called lunging strike. So I'm not 100% sure on this one, but if I had to guess, it has to do with kind of like a running animation, maybe increased range strike. And then if I had to guess, the top icon is just going to increase that range or increase the damage associated with that more ranged attack.
Yeah, I completely agree. It looks like some sort of dash attack or something like that. It looks similar to what we've seen in Battlefront with Jedi characters in the past. We saw with Obi-Wan. It just looks like Cal's moving fast. He has the speed lines behind him right there. So that's what it looks like to us. Moving over into the double-bladed stance, we already described what Gathering Tempest is going to do. The one to the right, that one's kind of throwing me through a loop here, Andres. What do we think that one is going to do?
Yeah, this one, obviously, we're just seeing a double-bladed lightsaber, and it is kind of in a rotating-like movement. I'm wondering if this is going to be some sort of like if you use the lightsaber in like a forward propeller-like motion. I don't know. My guess is honestly as good as yours on this one. And you know what? I'm pretty sure I actually unlocked this one when I was playing it, and that's kind of funny that I have no idea. Like, I don't remember what it is. But if I had to guess, it is just kind of like a forward lunging attack using the double-sided blade or the double-bladed saber.
And then the one right next to it reminds me of the animation in the game that we also saw in Fallen Order, where Cal was able to throw the double-bladed saber in a circle and attack enemies. But I remember that being a baseline ability, so I wonder if this is some sort of upgrade to it. It allows you to deal more damage. Perhaps you can throw it a second time, something like that. But I imagine it is an overall upgrade to that ability that Cal already has with the double-bladed saber.
Now I want to kind of work our way up the center of this skill tree. The next one, I think this might be a animation that we've already seen in the one of the combat trailers from IGN. I believe that there was a really cool animation where Cal spun upside down with his double-bladed saber. I'm wondering if that's this ability here. I'm willing to bet that that's what it is.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it looks like something out of Darth Maul, to be honest, from Phantom Menace. So,
oh, yeah.
And like you said, we've seen that animation before, so I agree with you. I think that one is that. If you look to the left, I think we have also seen that from some of the gameplay. It looks like Cal is coming down fast. You see the speed lines behind him. He's in a kneeling stance, and his fist is hitting the ground. I believe this is some sort of force repulse, which we saw some gameplay of this from the IGN preview. So if I had to guess, that is dealing with that, either unlocking that ability or upgrading that ability.
And you know, on that same vein, I'm wondering if the skill right above the skill that you just talked about, Nick, is maybe a second step to that first animation, where maybe the first half of the animation is you plunging down to the ground, and then the second half is Cal jumping up and using his lightsaber to deal even more damage to those enemies that are around him.
Yeah, he's clearly moving up in the air. Again, the speed lines are going up, and it looks like he's being elevated, so I completely agree. Now, the one all the way over to the right, it looks very similar to the one we saw with the single blade with the ability to reflect multiple blaster bolts. I think we're dealing with the same thing here, just with the double-bladed saber. The ability to reflect multiple blaster bolts, perhaps to multiple different enemies or multiple different directions, but definitely dealing with a blaster bolt reflection ability with the double-bladed saber here.
Now, looking at the very top of the double-bladed skill tree, this is another lightsaber throw ability. Again, I'm wondering if this is one of those lightsaber throw abilities where you can charge up the double-sided blade and then deal more damage, or it might be a example of increasing the range or increasing something associated with the lightsaber throw for the double-bladed saber.
Yeah. I completely agree. I think you're right on that one. Now, let's go ahead and move over to the dual wield stance. We already talked about most of the baseline level abilities for this stance. We got to see that in the footage. We got to see the backstep / the uncoiled strikes, the split reflection, and the focused parry. So I want to talk about the one right above focused parry and kind of what I remember from that one. I remember that one being an upgrade to the dual wield stance, but I know, Andreas, you had some time to talk with the devs over at Respawn about what this one does exactly. So if you want to just kind of fill us in on how that upgrades focused parry.
Yeah, sure thing. So from what I recall from discussing this with a couple of Respawn devs when we were playing, is that this one allows you to deal more damage with the parry ability. Again, this is a parry that uses a lot of force, and if I had to imagine, I think I recall they told me that this deals out even more force. So you're going to want to make sure that if you're going down this side of the skill tree, that you are increasing your overall force ability so that you can use this parry ability more, because it can be a real suck on your force meter.
Yeah, I'm happy you mentioned that. And before we move on to the next ability, I just want to kind of reiterate that and provide more context that you are not going to be able to spam this ability, because we tried against the Rancor. It deals a ton of damage. It's one of the best abilities that we had in the dual wield stance, but you're going to have to get in close and recover your force abilities once using this. You're not going to be able to just spam this and just cut down through enemies like a hot knife through butter. You can't do that.
And just one point that I think people are going to want to know, how do you regenerate your force bar?
If I recall correctly, one way to recover the force bar was you had to actually get in and get dirty and just some standard saber strikes to get your force back. At least that's how I remember being able to recover force against the Rancor. Now, I want to move on to the one next to the uncoiled strikes. This looks like a downward overhead strike with both of the dual wield sabers. It just looks like it will unlock some sort of powerful downward strike with those dual wield sabers. Pretty standard. It looks pretty simple from the icon there.
This one looks pretty cool. Now, turning our attention to the very top two, these two look like they are lightsaber throws. And it looks like, that said, there are two different ways to upgrade your lightsaber throw with the dual wield lightsabers. And that kind of makes me wonder, what the hell are these upgrades? Are these the standard charge and throw dealing more damage, or is this maybe associated with maybe throwing an extra saber? Because I know from using the dual wield stance that you start off only throwing one, but maybe you're able to throw both of your lightsabers. Nick, what do you think these two different abilities are? And if you had to guess, which one is which?
Yeah, so if I had to guess, the one under the right will allow you or unlock the ability to throw the two sabers, and the one above it, since it branches off from it, is just an upgrade to that one. It will allow you to do more things, maybe throw them longer, interact with more enemies, hit more enemies, but it looks like it's a clear-cut upgrade from the ability to throw both of the sabers, and I think that one to the right of it, below it, is the ability to throw the double blade or the dual wield sabers. Because I personally, what I remember with the saber throw when I had the dual wield stance, if I remember correctly, was because I was using it against the Rancor, you could only throw one of the sabers. Cal still held on to one of them and didn't allow you to throw both. So I'm thinking that once you get this ability, it allows you to throw both of them and deal even more damage. And I'm sure it has a cool force animation where Cal's using the force to kind of manipulate them and bring them in between different enemies. Kind of like the arrow from Guardians of the Galaxy, if you remember that, where he's able to manipulate it and kind of go back and forth. If I had to guess, that's what that does.
So we've talked about just about 25 skills here between the single, double-bladed, and dual-wield stances, not to mention the survival traits that we generally talked about, which include, I specifically recall being able to increase your maximum health and improving the stim. With all of those abilities, we're not even beginning to talk about the blaster stance, the crossguard stance, or all of the different force upgrades that we have available to us in this game. And I think the overall message, the overall point of this video is this game has a very deep rabbit hole when it comes to the combat system, and this doesn't just go hand in hand with the skills that are available to you. It also goes hand in hand with the very wide variety of enemies that you're going to face in this game and the wide opportunity that you will have to vary up your strategy to eventually deal damage and deal with all of those different enemies that you will face up against. And that goes from enemies like the standard enemies like Stormtroopers, Bedlam Raiders, and droids, all the way up to those legendary creatures that we were talking about, just like Nick was talking about with the Rancor. You're not going, I imagine you're not going to want to use a stance like the crossguard stance against the Rancor because it's a very bulky and slow stance. You're going to want to use a quicker stance, so you're quicker on your toes, like the dual wield stance against an enemy like the Rancor. So what this all paints a picture of is a game that has a very, very in-depth combat system that really you could spend hours and hours refining your tactics and really putting a lot of love and care into your combat approach in this game.
Yeah, I completely agree. This skill tree to me, or skill tree system, is very reminiscent of the one in God of War Ragnarok, which was very complex and very in-depth. I believe the team over at Respawn has done a phenomenal job of taking the skill tree in Jedi Survivor and taking it to the next level. And one last thing that I do want to give a huge shout out to Respawn for doing here in Jedi Survivor that a lot of games these days aren't doing is Cal isn't an idiot going into Jedi Survivor. He didn't all of a sudden forget his force abilities from Fallen Order and have to relearn how to force push, even though he's a Jedi Knight and has been one for 5 years. They're doing a really good job of bringing in more additional fun abilities. So they're not nerfing the hell out of Cal going into Jedi Survivor. So just want to give a big shout out to Respawn for actually doing that. I know that's one thing that really frustrates a lot of people in games, is that all of a sudden your character has somehow forgotten everything in between the sequel and the original game. So big shout out to Respawn for not doing that, to be honest with you. And one last thing I want to mention before we get out of here, outside of the abilities that we see for sure in this footage and the ones that we for sure remember, a lot of this we have speculated. We are not confirming any of these abilities. A lot of it is pure speculation based off of what we remember from our experience playing the game and what the logos look like. So some of these abilities might be a little different than what we speculated. We just want to make sure that we're clear with this and we're not promising things, or you think we're promising things that we aren't entirely certain of. But guys, let us know down below in the comments what ability you are most excited for, and if you think an ability does something different than what we speculated, we would also love to hear what you think it does, because again, a lot of this is pure speculation and just how we remember our experience from playing the game. So definitely let us know down below in the comments. Anyway, guys, that is going to do it for us for this one. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, we will see you all next time.